Tonight, releasing the affidavit. New details in the document supporting the search warrant for Mar-a-Lago. And Powell's painful prediction.
While higher interest rates, slower growth, and softer labor market conditions will bring down inflation, they will also bring some pain to households and businesses.
The Federal Reserve set to raise rates again to combat skyrocketing inflation. Plus, shifting focus.
We see a pivot back towards great power conflict, Russia and China.
A new era in threats to the U.S. All this and more on Faith Nation. All eyes on the affidavit. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Tara Mergener. Tonight, the release of the heavily redacted affidavit in support of the warrant authorizing the unprecedented search and seizure of former President Trump's Mar-a-Lago property in Florida. The affidavit, more than 30 pages long, reveals that 14 of the 15 boxes handed over to the National Archives for record keeping earlier this year contained 184 unique documents with classification markings. 67 of those marked confidential, 92 marked secret, and 25 marked as top secret. The documents appeared to contain national defense information. The affidavit says the storage locations for those documents were not authorized to store classified information. Those documents recovered before the FBI search in August led to, quote, probable cause to search the former president's estate for evidence, contraband, fruits of crime, or other items illegally possessed in violation of 3 criminal codes, including the Espionage Act. Now, President Biden asked whether it is ever appropriate for a president to take home classified documents, said it depends on the circumstances.
I have in my home a cabined-off space that is completely secure. I'm taking home with me today today's PDD. It's locked. I have a person with me, military with me. I read it, I lock it back up, and give it to the military.
Without a specialized area in which to receive classified documents, is it ever appropriate for a president to bring classified documents home with them?
It depends on the document and it depends on how secure they're bringing it.
The president said it will be up to the Justice Department to determine whether national security had been compromised at Mar-a-Lago. The ongoing DOJ criminal investigation comes as former President Trump lays the groundwork for a third presidential run in 2024. So here with us now is Tim Head, Executive Director of the Faith and Freedom Coalition. Tim, thanks for joining us tonight on Faith Nation. The Trump affidavit release, what does that tell us?
Well, honestly, it tells us that we're still kind of in the middle of the book, if you will, and there's still a lot of the book remaining to be written. So conflicts like this are actually very, very common. As a matter of fact, not just common, but universal. Every White House or president that transitions out of power, there always there's litigation and sort of challenges as to whether or not the president himself or senior officials have documents that either are classified or are not classified. This is actually not uncommon sort of conflict that's happening. It's just unusual for that outgoing president to also potentially be a candidate yet again in the next, presidential election. And so that's particularly, I think, where you have kind of this unusual snag in this process.
Yeah, no kidding. Very interesting circumstances, to say the least. So politically speaking, is the fiasco around the FBI search of the president's property a boon for Donald Trump?
Well, that's a great question, and frankly, a pretty good observation, because interestingly enough, as we know, in just the days, really within a week of this raid, the Trump online fundraising actually exploded because clearly, even if there weren't nefarious and intentions behind it, for all of us who are just kind of onlookers or bystanders, it looks very dubious, right? I think it was actually a major flaw or short-sightedness in the eyes of not only the FBI but also in even the general counsel at DOJ, who reviewed some of these things, to let this go through without really carefully scrutinizing this, because it looks like it was haphazard and very possibly politically motivated.
So quickly, the White House is slashing student loan debt this week. It just did. It's a major package, but even proponents are calling it good politics, bad policy. Quickly, do you think this is going to give Democrats the bump they want come November?
Well, I would say the bump is really that's a bit of an oasis. I think that they're kind of chasing fool's gold a little bit in this process, and honestly, from our perspective, good policy does lead to good politics, and the opposite is actually true. Also, this is not going to work well for them.
All right, Tim. Thanks for your thoughts as always.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. God bless.
God bless. Well, big pain ahead for American consumers. That is the warning from Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell at an annual policy meeting where he reaffirmed his commitment to halting inflation.
We are moving our policy stance purposefully to a level that will be sufficiently restrictive to return inflation to 2%. Restoring price stability will likely require maintaining a restrictive policy stance for some time.
Despite some decreases in July, inflation is still running near its highest level in more than 40 years. Powell says the result of this fight against soaring prices will mean higher interest rates, slower economic growth, and a softer labor market. And while he acknowledges that could negatively affect households and businesses, he says failing to get inflation under control would be far worse. Joining us now is Dr. Stephen Skanke, Chief Economic Advisor at Keel Point. Steve, thanks for coming on Faith Nation. The Fed is set to continue raising interest rates with inflation running rampant. Does it have a choice?
It really doesn't, Tara. And I think it's important just to mention that Chair Powell's speech in context compared to last year is particularly blunt and sobering and direct and pointing out that there's going to be pain. They got it wrong last year. And even though they'd like to see some positive signs, they really can't afford to be wrong again.
Right. Chairman Powell said also today that higher interest rates will lead to slower economic growth and a softer labor market. Is that putting it lightly? What lies ahead for this economy, in your opinion?
Well, it really all depends on how quickly the Fed can see the good news and slow the restrictiveness of their policy changes. There's a general belief in markets, and I think the Fed's best guess too is that inflation is coming. It will come down on its own. The big drop in gasoline prices from in the $5 a gallon range down into the $3.50 and $4 range has been huge, and that'll course through the economy and show up in a good way. But they can't get head faked on this again, and so they're going to be pretty tough. And they've said basically that barring some unexpected good news, that they're going to raise rates again by 0.75% at their September meeting. And you saw how stock markets reacted to that. And that's going to further have a negative impact on jobs, job growth, housing markets. It's going to hurt consumers, and small businesses in particular are going to feel the pain of this. And Powell has much just said that they need to be ready for the pain that's going to come with getting inflation under control.
And speaking of that pain, the dreaded R word, do you think we're effectively in an economic recession already?
That's such a good question, Tara. It's the data are so confusing on this. We had first and second quarter with negative economic growth, but on the other side of the ledger, gross domestic income was positive. The current outlook for third quarter, that is July, August, September, economic growth is in the range of 3 to 3.5%. And, you know, the job growth number expected for August is still positive in the range of 350,000 new jobs. So it doesn't look like we're at a recession when you look at all the metrics together, and it doesn't look like we're going to have a recession in the third quarter. But depending on how firmly the Fed keeps its foot on the brakes, that could change pretty quickly. And so what happens in October, November, December, or January, February, March of next year could be a very different picture if they continue to push so hard on tamping out inflation.
Steve, we've got just seconds left, but we have to mention the student loan slashing of that debt this week, spending $300 billion to delete up to $20,000 per eligible borrower quickly. What kind of effect do you think that's going to have on the economy?
Well, if the folks feel that they now can spend as a result of having some debt canceled, that'll be stimulative for the economy. Just really at the wrong time, Tara, to have that fiscal stimulus. That's unhelpful. Right.
Definitely a lot to be seen with that. Certainly a lot of opinions. Steve, thank you so much for joining us on this Friday.
Thank you.
All right. Well, a year ago this month, the U.S. withdrew from Afghanistan. The chaotic move not only ended a 20-year military presence, it's resulted in a major shift for America's intelligence community. As national security correspondent Caitlin Burke reports, those eyes are now focused on the next great threat, China.
U.S. intelligence experts are in the business of adapting. During the Cold War, the focus turned to Russia. After 9/11, the priorities switched to counterterrorism. Now a new era is underway.
We see a pivot back towards great power conflict, Russia and China in particular, but also Iran and North Korea. Challenges from nation states, not from terrorist organizations.
Former CIA officer Paul Colby, now an intelligence expert at Harvard, says China in particular will be a long-term focus.
China represents an enduring threat. So for the next 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, 50 years, we're going to be having some of the same discussions.
To counter Beijing, intelligence agencies have quietly moved hundreds of officers and major resources to this threat. Last October, the CIA launched the China Mission Center, a unit focusing explicitly on Beijing. The CIA is also making emerging technologies a priority, given how the Chinese have used it as a primary means of espionage.
The Chinese have shown that they are willing to pursue our personal data at a scale unlike anything anywhere else in the world.
FBI Director Christopher Wray says China holds more U.S. corporate and international data than any other country combined, and regularly targets U.S. government, infrastructure, and research. Intelligence officials also believe this data is gathered through apps like TikTok.
If you can collect that massive amount of data on a regular basis, just using artificial intelligence and other analytic tools, there's tremendous advantages if you can get that.
Collecting data on Beijing, however, is no easy feat. China is a closed authoritarian state with a massive surveillance apparatus and major restrictions on what's allowed in and out of the country. Colby says the U.S. will need to take a play from their book to be effective.
To understand what's happening in China, to understand their capabilities, and to understand their plans and intention, what's in Xi Jinping's head, that requires a large, focused, patient intelligence collection effort.
CBN News national security correspondent Caitlin Burke with that report. Thank you, Caitlin. Well, coming up, the Golden State's move to zero emissions, the painful and expensive reality behind the end of gas-powered cars for Californians. All right, so taking some of the sting out of the pain at the pump, well, you've noticed gas prices are down. Today's AAA national average down to $3.86. That is down about 50 cents from 30 days ago. The relief at the pump comes with energy prices still, though, at record highs. Even with the new low, prices per gallon still up about 80 cents from earlier this time last year. Well, the days appear to be numbered for gas-powered cars in California. The Golden State announcing it's transitioning to zero-emission vehicles only in the name of climate change. CBN's Brody Carter is on that story.
We will be the first jurisdiction in the world to require all new cars to be sold to be alternative fuel cars.
California passed a sweeping plan that will forbid the sale of gas-powered cars by 2035. By that time, all cars, trucks, and SUVs must be electric or hydrogen-powered. 20% of sales can be plug-in hybrids that run on batteries and gas.
As long as they're not running on water, because we know we don't have that in California, then I think electric cars I'm ready.
The rule passed California's Air Resources Board will not affect gas-powered cars currently in use, allowing used vehicles to stay on the road. And the state is doing it in phases, requiring 35% of new passenger vehicles being sold by 2026 to be electric and 68% by 2030. The policy was designed to cut vehicle emissions in half by 2040.
Just because, global warming and there's fires all the time, especially in California.
One problem with electric vehicles is that they're expensive.
From the affordability standpoint, EVs are typically more expensive, and we definitely don't want to put low-income buyers out of the market.
A lack of availability of electric vehicles and having enough infrastructure to support them are two other hurdles. The Biden administration hopes to ease the burden by giving interested buyers $7,500 in tax credits for EVs. But not everyone qualifies, and it's complicated.
There's a little bit of uncertainty about the battery life and how long they're going to last, so there's always the fear of buying one and then having to spend $20,000 on a battery, and especially getting a used one and so forth.
And as the nation's most populous state starts boosting EV infrastructure, it will need at least 15 times more vehicle chargers statewide and a power grid to support them. The transition will likely reshape the U.S. auto market, which gets 10% of its sales from California.
The car manufacturers themselves are celebrating and embracing it, including Toyota today, not just Ford and GM.
Brody Carter, CBN News.
When we come back, the dawn of a new era of spaceflight. We talk to NASA as they prepare for the next trip to the moon. The first step towards NASA's next trip to the moon is a go for launch. Artemis 1 marks the dawn of a new era of spaceflight, paving the way for humanity to reach the moon and beyond. Monday's test flight of NASA's Mega Moon rocket carrying the Orion spacecraft, setting the stage for the first woman and first person of color to step on the lunar surface. Now is NASA expert Najud Moranci. Najud, NASA is launching a mission next week, of course. Why is this historic?
This is a historic mission for us because we're about to relaunch our plans to explore deep space and the lunar surface. So this is our test flight of Artemis 1, where we need to demonstrate that the rocket and the spacecraft are safe for the next flight with crew.
So important, of course, and Artemis 1 is the first of an entirely new set of missions for NASA. And I understand this is the one that's going to get us ready to send humans back to the moon and onto Mars?
Yes, our plans are that we can continue exploring, that we have a sustainable program. So building out the systems to do lunar exploration are the same types of systems we need to go to Mars. So the plan is that as we start exploring the moon, we'll continue and expand upon that further to continue for those missions to Mars.
Yes, so exciting. So how does this new Artemis program differ from the Apollo program?
So it's a little different from Apollo. The physics hasn't changed much. So some things like the capsule shape look very much the same between Apollo and Orion. But Apollo went to the equatorial region on the moon. They were just going to the easiest place to get to as a national imperative. we are exploring the South Pole, which has very interesting permanently shadowed regions and craters where we might find water ice, as well as being a program like we talked about that can go to Mars and continue building the system. So a sustainable exploration with ever longer missions as we go.
So much goes into the planning and the execution, et cetera. What makes you most excited about this particular mission, if you had to pick one thing?
So the one moment in the mission I'm most excited about, and I used to work on Orion, so it is where my heart lies, right? It is getting Orion into the distant retrograde orbit. It'll be 40,000 miles on the far side of the moon. And from that vantage point, we'll be able to take a selfie with Orion, the moon, and Earth all together. So I'm looking for us to reach that milestone and go further than any human spacecraft has ever been.
Well, you definitely have to take the selfie, right?
Absolutely.
So, so much work I know goes on behind the scenes for a mission like this. Tell me about, can you give me a sense of how much work this really is?
There's an incredible amount of work, and really it comes down to the people, right? Thousands of people have contributed to the vehicle design, the development, the testing, and the mission itself. So getting to this point represents the work and the careers of truly thousands of people around the world, including our European Space Agency partners that built the service module for Orion. So all of this is just demonstrating how we can work together to do hard things.
Right. And of course, our viewers are going to want to know how they can learn more. What should they do if they want to know more about what's happening?
Certainly. If you want to learn more, nasa.gov is NASA's main webpage with links to a lot of the Artemis information, or just use your search browser to look for NASA Artemis. There's plenty of information, images, and background, as well as things like teachers' activities to do in classrooms with students.
Naju, thank you so much for joining us. Good luck. There is so much to be excited about. We'll all be watching.
Thank you for having me.
All right, coming up, you are going to love this. Meet the friendly pooch who is blessing other dogs and social media feeds, by the way, with her very funny habit. Stay tuned. Finally tonight, a Bulldog Blessing. Meet Olive. Her favorite thing to do is bless her daycare buddies with a paw on their head. On a daily basis, Olive approaches the other dogs and places her paw on them. How sweet. Closing her eyes like she is saying a prayer. Her greetings quickly went viral when her daycare shared the pup's sweet habit. While it may be far-fetched to call it a blessing, there is no doubt Olive is spreading smiles and will cheer you up on a rough day. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll see you Monday.